at the University of Washington at the Social Development Research Group, and I am one of the members of the YouthPower Learning team that put together this toolbook that we're going to be talking about. So the topic for today is measuring positive youth development in the real world and having the right tools for the job. And on this webinar with me is Lindsay Wolf. Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Lindsay. I'm the project manager for YouthPower Learning. And I also help facilitate these webinars, and I'll be chatting with you. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get them answered. And I also have Cassandra Jesse here with me, the director of YouthPower Learning. Cassandra?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Typing me notes and letting me know if I'm on track or not. Lindsay, I don't know if you're not. The microphone's not plugged in, but we're going to move along because we don't have a lot of time. We have a lot of material to cover. By the end of this webinar, our objectives are to better understand why it's important to measure positive youth development outcomes. I'm going to briefly outline USAID's measurement strategy for youth so far. I'm going to give you an introduction and a little bit of hands-on experience with the toolkit, which isn't quite out yet, so you're getting a sneak preview. We're going to talk quite a bit about YouthPower and the supports it provides for missions and implementers, and we're going to talk about some of the key challenges and strategies to address those challenges in measuring positive youth development outcomes. So why is this important? To begin with, there's a lot of power in measuring the results of your program. So we can tell the difference between success and failure, so we can learn from success, so we can correct failures. And if we can demonstrate results for our programs, then frequently we can win some public support and potentially funding to take that program to a larger scale if that's appropriate. So currently, USAID has a number of important measurement pieces in place. It sort of started with the Youth and Development Policy, which really provides the call to action and sort of recognizes how difficult sometimes measuring positive youth development can be. And they have redesigned the F indicators. You're probably all familiar with the F indicators. There are two new standard F indicators that have to do with the number of youth at risk of violence being trained in social or leadership skills, and the number of laws and policies and procedures adapted or implemented with the assistance of programs. And then there are two pilot F indicators, which have to do with measuring increased self-efficacy for youth and for getting youth more involved in civil society and leadership skill training. So, but that's just the beginning. USAID has adopted positive youth development as its strategy for youth programming and acknowledges that that could be very different than what you're accustomed to doing, and that in fact measuring positive youth development outcomes could be new to implementers and mission staff, and that it has sort of some unique issues to be dealt with. So to provide as much support as possible, they are funding two interlinked IDIQs, one for evidence and evaluation and one for implementation, and they're interlinked because these two pieces work together and feed into each other. Positive YouthPower Learning is under the evidence and evaluation IDIQ, and the YouthPower Learning team provides a number of supports for leading research, evaluations, and events that are designed to build the evidence and inform the global community about how to help young people pursue their goals and empower them to continue to and to benefit from peaceful and prosperous communities. And YouthPower Learning provides evidence and evaluation support to USAID missions for youth assessments and evaluations, for research, training, strategy, and program design, and other technical assistance through the field support buy-in option. This is something important to keep in mind. So one of the ways that YouthPower Learning provides the support is through a website. Here it is. You should be able to see it now. There's a lot of information on this website. It's constantly being updated. There are opportunities for you to be involved in communities of practice around issues that are important to you. Under this approach tab, there's a lot of basic information about positive youth development, what it is, what it's made of, what the strategy is. We're going to be actually talking about that quite a bit in just a minute. And under this resources tab, this is where you're going to find the toolkit once it's published, which is going to happen very soon. But there's already a lot of stuff here under the resources tab, and when you have a chance, you should really explore as much of this as possible. But this is where you'll find the toolkit that we'll be talking about today, as well as a report on a meta review, which we'll be talking about a little bit too. So what is it? Positive youth development engages youth along with families and communities and/or governments so that youth are empowered to reach their full potential. These approaches build skills, assets, and competencies. They foster healthy relationships, they strengthen the environment, and they transform systems. So that's a lot. It's both a philosophy and an approach to programming, and it gives us some guiding principles to help us design policy, programs, supports, and opportunities. And what's special about positive youth development is that it focuses on strengths and assets and on youth engagement in every part of the process. And it's inclusive. It's good for everybody. How it's implemented in a local context will vary a great deal, but all youth can benefit from increasing their strengths and their assets and being engaged in their communities. The outcomes are across sectors, and every sector has a role to play in building positive youth development programming and evaluating it. And because it's developmental, there's some long-term commitment involved, perhaps longer than some of the programs that you're more accustomed to. And it's a more holistic approach to the whole individual, and it's based on developmental stages and needs. So it can change for kids as they grow. And youth for USAID are anybody from ages of 10 to 29. So it's a very long age range. Now, the reason that USAID has adopted positive youth development is because there's a lot of very solid evidence, decades of work in high-income countries that positive youth development-inspired interventions have outcomes, impacts across many areas: crime and violence prevention, delaying sexual activity, increasing academic and soft skills, increasing community engagement and preventing substance abuse, and improving relationships. The question is, does that generalize to low and middle income countries where the situation could be very different? And to understand that better, YouthPower Learning has just completed a meta review of positive youth developments in low and middle income countries. We had to kind of come up with a way to determine whether a program was or was not PYD, because very few of these programs actually use the positive youth development label. So with the definition and some other criteria through a group process, we came up with a way to determine whether programs were positive youth development, and we went through the peer-reviewed literature as well as the gray literature, and we found about 100 programs all over the globe that we thought qualified as positive youth development that also had some kind of information about an evaluation. And in this meta review, which you'll be able to access through that website I just showed you, the programs with positive outcomes had some common traits. They engaged numerous stakeholders and worked across multiple settings. They taught transferable skills and knowledge to support positive outcomes across sectors. And many of them included innovative, youth-centered, and youth-led activities. The most common activity in these programs was still adult-led, but often in conjunction with youth participating in the design and the implementation of the program. This meta review provides some very useful recommendations, and there are recommendations for a number of different audiences, for implementers and policy developers, but there are only 2 recommendations for evaluation and learning, which is what we're really focused on today. And the first recommendation is to increase the investment in process and impact evaluations for positive youth development programs in low and middle income countries. And to that end, in order to build the evidence, it's necessary to use holistic and consistent measurement of positive youth development outcomes, in addition to the outcomes that you traditionally measure that are specific to your sector and specific to the goals. So we'll be talking more about that. So the PYD framework, based on the definition that we've just seen, is sort of organized into 4 domains: assets, agency, contribution, and the enabling environment. And we'll talk about each of those so that you understand in more concrete terms what they are. But what we're looking for here is to create a space where these 4 domains overlap, because that's where you find healthy, productive, engaged youth. And I just want to point out in this graphic that we've intentionally depicted the enabling environment as surrounding the other domains, because it really has to support the development of assets, agency, and contribution. So what are assets? Youth have necessary resources and skills to achieve the desired outcomes, and resources are things like money and housing and schooling. And skills can be specific skills to run a piece of machinery or a computer or to develop a particular craft, but it also includes communication skills, emotion regulation skills, and other sorts of soft skills that are transferable from situation to situation, and that will really be a resource over a lifetime. Agencies, when youth have the ability to employ their assets and their aspirations to influence or make their own decisions and goals in their lives, and to act upon those decisions in order to achieve desired outcomes without fear of violence or retribution. So to do this, an individual needs self-efficacy and mastery. They need to have a positive image of themselves, a positive identity, some future orientation, the ability to plan and execute a plan. Because the goal is for youth to be able to make a contribution, to be encouraged and recognized and engaged as a source of change for their communities. And the kinds of contributions youth can make are many: civic activity, leadership, mentoring, all kinds of community projects. So the enabling environment is so important because it means that youth is surrounded by an environment that maximizes their assets, agency, access to services and opportunities, the ability to avoid risk and to stay safe, secure, and protected while promoting their social and emotional competence to thrive. So what does that kind of environment look like? Well, it promotes healthy relationships with positive others, and it provides positive opportunities and healthy norms and safe spaces to support the development of the other domains. Now, in addition to the definitions and the domains, the YouthPower Learning, along with YouthPower Action, which is part of the implementation IDIQ, really came together to put together a list of features that positive youth development programs have to make it a little more real if you're trying to develop and implement one of these programs. And this is probably starting to look familiar. These programs build skills, they engage youth in making contributions, they build healthy relationships and promote bonding, they foster belonging and membership, they provide clear and consistent positive norms, they create safe spaces, and they provide access to youth-friendly services and service integration. So those are the 7 features of positive youth development programs, which have been found to be successful in high-income countries, and now there's a little bit of evidence in low-middle-income countries. So this is just to help you understand where USAID is in this process. They are making investments in programs that do this, that engage youth, that build skills, that foster healthy relationships. And their intention is that if that happens, then it will increase the use of services and opportunities. It will improve the quality of services and opportunities. And it will strengthen the engagement of young people in their communities. And what we'll get over here in these last boxes, if that happens, is youth who are able to access economic opportunities, participate in democratic processes, and have strong voices in youth-friendly local and national institutions. So that's the goal. So USAID has already developed some criteria for how to measure whether a program is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And that's what indicators are. I'm sure you're all familiar with this language. So an indicator is a piece of information that tells you whether your program is working. And USAID's criteria are that these indicators be direct and objective, or as direct and objective as possible, that they actually be useful to management, that they are attributable to the program, so not just changes that are happening in the environment, that they're practical, that they're sufficient to provide the knowledge we need about whether the program is working, and that they can be disaggregated as needed. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the webinar. And this information is actually available. I've put the website reference here, and you'll have access to these slides, so you can come back to this later if you want. So here is the USAID program cycle. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. And what we did in the toolkit was that we determined, we sort of focused in on 5 key phases that are embedded in this program cycle. And we linked those phases to the domains, features, and the indicators, and provide support for understanding how to use each of those in each of these 5 phases. So the key phases that are identified in the toolbook, I'm sure you're very familiar with. You may use other words or ways of expressing these kinds of steps along the process of developing a program and evaluating it. This is just the way we laid it out. So, so the steps are to define the key outcomes, to determine the features and beneficiaries, to finalize the logic model, to decide what to measure and how, so to design the evaluation study, to analyze the data, disseminate the findings, and adapt the program. Now, I did a version of this webinar where I really focused on the first phase and the last phase, but today I'm going to focus more on the middle phases because I think that they're more relevant to implementers. And actually, I'm going to sort of walk through phase 2 and then jump to phase 4 and just try to give you a sense of what it really means to use this toolkit. So what's included in the toolkit is a lot of guidance and explanation and detail about what positive use development is and why we care about it, and how you can think about it at each phase of the development of your program. But there are also some extra documents at the end, which we call the annexes, and they're almost standalone documents that you'll be able to use in this process. And there are 3 important ones that we're going to talk about today. There's the illustrative indicators table, which actually lays out a great many potential indicators to use to measure the effectiveness of your program. There's a measurement source table which links those indicators to possible tools to actually measure those things. And then we went deeper and we investigated those tools, and we provide reference sheets for each of those measurement sources. And those reference sheets contain information like, what the citation of the source is, the description of the whole. Many of them are surveys or large surveys, the targeted age for that tool, and the relevant items that link to the illustrative indicator. So there are frequently subscales within larger surveys, and we actually give you those details. So let's think about this for a second. So in phase 1, you've already determined what your primary outcomes are, and that might be determined by mission, and something that you have to work with from the start and that you care about passionately when you're developing a program. So in phase 2, we're really getting more into the weeds, determining what positive youth development features the program should use and who the beneficiaries will be. So what are the features that you're going to include in the program? Who are the target beneficiaries? And how are the features and beneficiaries connected to the key outcomes of your program? So I've taken this directly out of the toolkit. So when you see that document, you'll see this sort of information laid out just like this. So for each phase, we define what the phase is and indicate what the key questions are. So what are the features? We've talked about the 7 features. They're based on the most effective elements of PYD programs. And your program should aim to build youth skills, encourage engagement, and strengthen bonds with positive adults in order to be consistent with those features and to be effective. And the beneficiaries will almost certainly include youth, but it could include other people who work with youth, including teachers and parents and mentors and clinic staff and policymakers and any other stakeholders in the positive development of the youth in your local situation. So the way the toolkit is laid out is that for each of these phases, it's all organized around the features and the domains and the indicators. And for each phase, the toolkit provides ideas for how to apply the domains, the features, and the indicators in that phase. So we're going to walk through that a little bit. I'm going to start with the features because this phase really focuses on selecting features for your program. So what the toolkit says is look at the list of 7 features, consider your program goals, and think about which features would support the primary outcomes of interest. And find program features listed that may be able to add, enhance, or build on through your current program plan. So you have that list. Think about the domains, and once you've selected your features, see how they connect back to the domains. And this is kind of an important step because if you selected features and then you look back to the domains and you go, oh, I'm really only focused on one domain, you might think through that again, because the more domains that you push on, the more effective the programming is going to be. And then when we think about the construct or the indicator, so construct is just, it's a concept that can't be directly measured. And so indicators are the way we get at these concepts that are difficult or impossible to measure directly. And in phase 2, it's helpful to review the indicator table to get a more concrete idea of what indicators might be used to measure the impact of the features that you're considering. And the program may have more than one type of beneficiary, so it's important to think sort of practically as you look at the indicator table about collecting information from all of those beneficiaries and understanding how different beneficiaries may be have different impacts on your program. So one of the ways that the toolkit tries to make these ideas as concrete as possible is that it provides a case study. And it takes that one case study and sort of steps through it in all of the phases. And I'm not going to tell you a lot about this case study, but it's the Youth Theater for Peace program, and some of you may actually know a great deal about that, I don't know. It employs a drama for conflict transformation approach, and the goals and objectives are to empower youth and adults in conflict-prone communities to promote lasting conflict prevention and promote a culture of peace within those communities and beyond if possible. Now, without giving you a lot more detail at this point, I'm going to give you a little more detail later, let's just think about what the key positive youth development features might be for a program like this. And do they tap into more than one domain? And who are the best targets or beneficiaries given those features? We're just going to think through that a little bit. And in this program, the potential indicators for the Youth Theater Peace project are going to look like this. These are just possibilities. So under assets, that's our first domain. Skill building is one of the features. Improving conflict mitigation or resolution skills might come under that. domain. Improved planning and goal setting might be one of the skills to develop. Under the domain of agency and skill building, you might want to increase optimism or hope about the future, increase feelings of self-efficacy or empowerment, and increase a sense of purpose in life. Those are all potential skills within the domain of agency that would be important for this program. And then under contribution, the youth should be engaged in the activities of the program from design, implementation, and through evaluation. And the enabling environment should provide a safe space. So the youth should report that the program provides a safe environment. This is especially important when you're dealing with conflict and trying to build conflict resolution skills. So, as an example, and there is much more detail about this in the toolkit, the team worked with a variety of beneficiaries to choose a number of features for their program. They worked directly with youth to build skills, including assets and agency. They also trained adult mentors to help run the program, which promoted healthy relationships and bonding between the young people and the adults, which addresses the enabling environment. So this program really worked at multiple levels, from the individual to the community. And one of the activities was, so that these adult mentors and youth came together in these workshops to work on using dramatic techniques to consider all kinds of options for conflict resolution. And they learned a lot of skills in that process. And then they went to their communities and they recruited other people in their communities and they organized dramatic activities which were intended to improve the whole community's ability to deal with the conflict present there. So now I'm going to sort of jump to phase 4, where you have to decide what to measure. So phase 3 has to do with, clarifying your logic model. You probably all know a lot about that. And we don't really, logic models can take forever to develop. And you're probably better at it than I am, so I'm not going to go there today in our limited time. So I'm going to talk about phase 4, which is deciding what to measure and how to measure it, which has to do with your study design and choosing your indicators. So, what are the constructs that you need to measure in this program that have to do with positive development? What are the best measurement sources for you to use? And what's the design that best addresses the evaluation needs of this particular project at this particular stage of development? So once again, we're going to sort of look at domains and features and constructs and indicators for this phase. So in terms of domains, you want to ensure that you have at least one indicator for each of the relevant domains. So we've talked about how important it is to include as many domains as possible, so you need to measure as many of them as possible. The features, which is sort of the core of what we've just been talking about, you want to have at least one indicator for each of the constructs indicated by the relevant features. And you might have more than one. We're going to talk a little bit about triangulating data from multiple sources in a minute. So here we need to review the PYD illustrative indicator table. And actually, I need to pull that up. Let me do that. Oh, wait, don't do it like that. I can do it like that. Because I want to actually show you the table. So just hold on with me for a second here. I'll pull it up. Should have done that already. Don't know what I was thinking. Okay, that's the measurement. And this is second. Okay, where are you? Okay, so here are the illustrative indicators. This is the table. I just want to show you how the table is laid out because you're going to use this table. So each section it deals with a specific domain. So the first section is the assets domain. And then under that domain, all of the features that might address that domain. Skill building is the primary feature that addresses the assets domain, not surprisingly. And so under the constructs column, there are these all these different things that you might try to influence in your program. You might be trying to increase the years of schooling. You might be trying to improve in interpersonal skills or coping skills. And this table provides a definition of what we mean by that, and then indicators that you might use. So the indicator for interpersonal skills is increased interpersonal skills at the conclusion of the training compared to the measure at the beginning of the training. So that's, you're trying to measure change almost in every case. All of these indicators have to do with that. So this is how the table is organized, and you'll be able to use that, I think, effectively. So getting back to this, stepping through this phase, you're going to look at that table and select indicators by following this organization of the domains and the features and understanding what the definitions of those constructs are. You're going to select those indicators. And then from that, you're going to select tools for measuring those indicators. And that is what this table is for. This takes these constructs under each of the domains and tells you what kind of measure you could use. And that's, it's a map. It doesn't give you a lot of detail. And then I'm going to show you one more thing, which is one of these resource sheets. So if you choose a construct, an indicator for a construct that has a measurement, and the tool happens to be the Flourishing Children Project tool, which is great for measuring a lot of stuff. So you might be using this. There are many others, though, but I want you to see what this looks like. The resource sheet tells you where this tool came from, which constructs under positive youth development we think it's good for measuring, what the age range is, how you can get the tool, and then specifically for each of the constructs, for each of the indicators, what the items in that survey are for. This one includes both a parent tool and an adolescent tool report, so that can be very helpful. I'm going to show you how that works here. And in general, the tools that we have selected are as low cost as possible. They're easy to use. They have good psychometric properties. And they've either been used in the international context or we think they have the potential to be used in developing countries. I'm going to talk about adapting these measures in just a minute. So you remember all of these potential indicators, right? So let's just pick one. Let's pick the indicator for increased ability to plan and set goals. There's a measure in the Flourishing Children Project for goal orientation. There's a subscale for goal orientation. And the resource sheet will show you what the questions are, what the answer options are, so that you can evaluate whether that's really the measure you want to use. Here's another example, increased self-efficacy. There's a subscale for self-efficacy in the Chinese Positive Development Scale. And there's a resource sheet for that with detailed information about how you can get that, that instrument and use it to evaluate your program. So there's a lot of information, very concrete, useful information in this toolkit because we understand that these are new things for many people. This is not the way you normally evaluate programs, but it's becoming very important to do this. So now I want to talk about some considerations for monitoring and evaluation design, which includes data collection. So because positive youth development constructs are not the ones we typically are concerned with in our sector-specific outcomes, these measurements may be new to you, and they really are difficult to measure in a direct fashion. And so one of the best strategies for evaluating the positive youth development outcomes of a program is to triangulate using data from multiple sources using multiple strategies. And these are just some considerations related to positive youth development. If you collect qualitative data through interviews, meetings, or focus groups, you can design the prompts or the questions or the design of the meeting to link directly to the PYD domains or concepts. So you can ask specifically for people to talk to you about what are the assets and resources that they have, what do they need that they don't have, so that people are actually talking about the thing you're trying to measure. And then once you have transcripts from these activities, you can code them for domains or specific PYD concepts. And I just at this point want to say that qualitative data collection and analysis strategies frequently and very appropriately have a sort of bottom-up strategy where you take the transcripts and you read them and you look for the themes that emerge out of that. And I am not suggesting for a second that you not do that. It's a valuable strategy. But it's also possible to sort of keep your research question in mind as you do initial coding of these transcripts so that you end up with information about the very thing that you're trying to change in your program. With quantitative data, it's especially important that you collect data on multiple occasions so that you can detect change. Change is the important thing here. So you're going to need to collect data at baseline and inline at a very minimum. It's sometimes very valuable to collect data sort of somewhere midway through the program for course correction purposes. And to see if maybe you've already achieved much of your goal. Maybe the program doesn't need to be as long. Those kind of questions can be incorporated at a midline assessment. It's also a great opportunity to catch any problems. And by problems, it could be problems with the program. There could be, unintended negative consequences. You're going to want to catch those early. So there's value in doing that. But here's the really important piece that has to do with positive youth development. It's developmental, which means the benefits sometimes aren't achieved until further down the road in development. And so it's important in these programs, whenever possible, to build in a follow-up assessment at some appropriate time frame so that you can actually detect the benefits of the program. I've worked on a program and an evaluation here in the United States of a program that was implemented when the kids were in the 8th grade. It's positive youth development, family-focused or parent training kind of program. It was implemented in the 8th grade. It was a randomized trial, so we had a control group. We actually had 2 different kinds of implementation. And we saw some improvement in specific skills that were taught in the training at post-test or at inline. Not really much at the 12-month follow-up, but at the 24-month follow-up by 10th grade, you could really see the effects of this program because it was designed to prevent substance use and violence, which doesn't really become a problem for these kids until they get into high school or a little bit older. So you can't really see the effects unless you're measuring further out. So that's an important consideration. You also need to compare to someone. I'm sure you all understand this, but it's especially important with positive youth development programs because you're measuring development, something that changes on its own for every kid. What you're trying to do is enhance the development of particular skills or opportunities or especially in the environment, which doesn't necessarily change for everybody. So it's important to compare the change experienced by the participants in your program to change experienced by similar people who are not in the program. Now, the strongest evidence before we're going to take a program to some big scale is a randomized controlled trial. But that's not always the best approach, depending on sort of where you are in the development of the program. But whenever possible, building in some appropriate comparison is important because of the developmental aspect of the very things that we're trying to measure. Another thing to keep in mind is that these constructs, these positive youth development constructs, are interconnected. If if you improve social skills, then it's likely that you will be improving positive self-image, and once that's done, then contribution to the community can increase. They're linked together intentionally by the theory. We know that they're correlated in reality from all the research that's been done so far. So when you're thinking about these indicators, you need to think about multiple indicators so that you can triangulate, but you also need to appreciate that they're correlated to each other. And there may be situations in the reporting where aggregating is useful, although you're always going to need to report every indicator, the change in that indicator from baseline to end line to follow up. But thinking about them and grouping them together makes sense because they're correlated to each other. We just touched on disaggregating by group. This is particularly important in positive youth development programs because they are inclusive and universal. The kids who participate or the kids who are beneficiaries of these programs and the young adults, they vary a lot in age, and so knowing whether your program is having a greater impact on the younger youth versus the young adults is important. Sometimes it's very important to understand whether you're having a greater impact on males than females, or a greater impact on kids who are not in school versus kids who are in school. So it's important to collect data so that you can pull it apart and report it separately for different groups. So this whole thing, the toolkit, the meta review, these webinars, there's going to be an in-person training in DC on this toolkit, which will be all day long and much more in depth. All of this is designed to support USAID's goal, which is to use positive youth development as the strategy for youth programming in low and middle income countries. And it comes from the recognition that it could be difficult to do. And that's what the YouthPower IDIQs are all about. I'm going to talk about two challenges for just a minute as we wrap up here and give you a chance to bombard me with questions. And one of them has to do with adapting measurement tools. There's a very great chance that the tool that you find in the toolkit that measures the perfect construct for your perfect program is not going to be exactly applicable in your situation. And we're going to talk about time and the implication of that for designing, programming, timelines, and funding. So first let's talk about adapting measures. So let's imagine that this lovely young woman has been recruited to help design and evaluate a program for youth in her community. And somehow in the planning meeting, she got bamboozled into taking on the task of looking at the measures. Once they've selected their indicators, they've selected some measures, and her job is to determine whether these measures are going to work in their context and what it will take to make them work in her community. And the first thing she realizes is that they're not all in the language she needs them to be in, which means there's going to be translating. And I'm sure most of you know, when you translate from one language to another, then you have to back translate to the original language and check for accuracy and meaning, and that takes time and resources to do that. She also is starting to think, well, we're trying to design a program that will work for youth from age 15 to 29. Some of these measures don't seem exactly appropriate to 15-year-olds. I'm not sure they're going to completely understand these questions. You've got to think about that. In our community, some of these questions are not going to fly for either the women or the men, the girls or the boys. Really think about whether these measures are appropriate. Do we need to adapt them so that they work better, so that they really get at the issue for girls in these programs? So that's another thing to worry about. And all of that, along with about 100,000 other issues that come up in the process of adapting measures, means there has to be a pilot test. And I just want to make 2 points about the pilot test. One pilot test is a feasibility test. So you make some adaptations, do the translation, you throw out some of the items because they're not quite right for your situation, you reword some items, Now we don't know what the psychometric properties of your adaptive measure is, and it hasn't been tried yet, right? So you need to do a feasibility study to make sure that youth like the ones that are going to be in your program understand the questions, understand the response options, can manage the logistics of the measure itself. And then you may make more changes. But once you've gotten to an adaptation that you feel pretty solid about, then you have to do a pilot test where you collect enough data to run some psychometric statistics to determine whether that measure is reliable and valid in its new form. It doesn't take a ton of data, but it is a step that's very important because without validating the reliability of that measure, you don't know that it's really going to work for you. The other thing I want to talk about is time. It takes time to learn new skills. It takes time to change a community's norms, which is, often what we're trying to do to improve the environment for youth. And it takes time to experience the benefits of youth programming once you're an adult. So the time it takes influences the way you design the program, the way you design the evaluation, the timing of the follow-ups, and all of that influences the kind of resources that it's going to take to do this sort of work. It's not quick and easy. So now that I've scared you to death, why would you do this? And the reason is because there really is very strong evidence that positive youth development strategies can prevent a wide range of negative outcomes and increase positive outcomes for youth in high-income countries. There's evidence from low and middle-income countries, but it's sparse, and all of this effort is to promote growing that evidence so that we know what works and doesn't work, specifically in your context. You can add to that evidence. And once you do that, it could lead to more funding, and more importantly, it could lead to scaling up programs that are really effective. There's really high potential for USAID positive youth development programs to improve the lives of young people all over the world. That's really the goal. That's why we care about all of this. That's why we're going to take on these challenges. Okay, I'm done. I am done chatting. So, let's see. Oh, there are a lot of people who have signed on since I started talking. I know it's droned on. So, do any of you have questions or are there discussion points you want to make? You can type them into the chat box, and we'll think about them. Celia, you have a question or an idea? I know you're involved in an interesting project. Oh, well, I'm glad you found it helpful. There'll be lots of detail in the toolbook. You'll find it in the toolkit. You will find it very useful. I don't think that USAID funds projects in the U.S. Lindsay, maybe you or Cassandra could help answer that question.
I mean, USAID's investments really are for
a minute about
low-income countries.
So the meta review, where we went out and looked for any positive youth development type programs with evaluations, we found quite a few of them use peer mentoring, and some of them have positive impacts on their intended outcomes. I know there's some controversy about peer mentoring, and I think it's very important to think carefully about your particular local context. Because when you get young people together, or when you get any people together really, there's a chance that they'll kind of infect each other with bad ideas. And so you want to make sure that you're providing the right kind of training and support for peer mentoring. But it can be very effective. We did find evidence of that. So yeah, so we're working, the toolkit is with the designer, and we're catching the tiny little nitpicky problems with it now. We're working on that every day, so it should be out by the end of the year. So are there other questions, ideas you want to talk about? Oh yeah, the Search Institute and their assets. So, so yeah, we actually talk about that. There's a portion of the toolkit that addresses sort of the development of positive youth development as a theory and strategies, and the Search Institute plays big on that. So they really did kind of get this thing started with the 40 assets, and I think that their measurement tool is not freely available. But it's a well-validated tool, and if you have access to it, that's another consideration. But yeah, that's great work. Really got the ball rolling on thinking about the positive aspects of youth and what they have to offer and what you can build on, instead of just focusing, which is what the history of this is, that before this movement was started, all the strategies around youth had to do with sort of treating a problem after it came up, and trying to stop kids from doing bad things without really providing support for how to do good things. So that's been very important work. Okay, and other things, Eliza, you have something? And, there'll be a recording of this webinar posted on the website. We recorded one yesterday that's a little different than this one. I don't know exactly which one we're going to post, whichever one seemed to go more smoothly, I imagine. But you can do it again, and you can tell other people about it. They can watch it if they like. So the question is, does the toolkit address the role of intersectionality and capture the advantages and disadvantages that youth have as compared to one another in the baseline? So, so we don't talk about intersectionality using that word. We talk about the need to understand who's in your program, and ways to measure so that you can disaggregate, which we've talked about a little bit. Some programs will target specifically vulnerable groups of youth, and others will be delivered in a more universal manner. And so the measurement toolkit is really designed to be used across sectors, to be used as broadly as possible across all contexts. But the reason there are so many indicators is because you need to pick and choose the ones that are appropriate to your situation. Yes. Sometimes it's hard to serve the most vulnerable youth, and making extra effort to do that. One of the things in the meta review we discovered is that although there's programming specifically for girls and women with relationship to outcomes that they're vulnerable to, there are not a lot of programs focused on specifically vulnerable populations. Some on urban youth, in particularly poverty-ridden communities or school districts. There's some of that. We didn't find a single program that was focused on sexual minority youth who are at extreme risk, and would really like to see more effort made to design programming for them, or to reach out and include them, because they'll get excluded if you don't make a special effort to include them. But how to do that is very specific to your local situation. I hope that was helpful. The The best way, I think, to communicate with us is to go to the website. There are various ways to communicate with various groups of people and to participate in discussion. So I would direct you to the youthpower.org website. You could spend all day there. It's like a shopping mall. It's fabulous. You're welcome. I hope this has been helpful to for all of you who are hanging in there. There's a link to an email, so you can send an email to info@youthpower.org. And there will be other opportunities. We're producing some research briefs, and like I said, this webinar will be available on the website. There will be other webinars that are specific to particular sectors, and there's going to be an all-day training. I'm not absolutely sure if we've nailed down the date for that, but an all-day in-person training in Washington, D.C. For USAID missions and implementers who want to use this toolkit. We really try to design the toolkit. I mean, it's funded by USAID, so it has specific USAID information in it, but our goal was to make it useful to anybody designing and implementing and evaluating positive youth development programs. So I just want to point out, as Lindsay has put in the chat, that there are communities of practice that you can access through the website, which is really where you can join in to the discussion and both learn and provide learning to your colleagues and they're sort of built around particular issues in positive youth development. There's one focused specifically on how to get youth engaged in program design and implementation and evaluation. So, you know, and there are fabulous people contributing in those communities of practice. So really encourage you to do that. Lindsay is providing links to specific things on the webpage, so you know what events are going on. And the resources page, which is where the toolkit will be when it's ready to be downloaded, as well as the meta review that I've been talking about. That report will be linked on the webpage as well. Okay, is there just these last couple of minutes? Is there anything else? I so appreciate all of you showing up and sticking with it.
Thank you so much, Marty.
Maybe I'll run into some of you again. That would be great.
All right, thank you, everyone. The recording will be posted.
Okay, I hope all of you have a good rest of your day, whatever part of the day is left for you. It's still pretty early in the morning here, so I have a long day ahead of me.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll go ahead and stop our recording and conclude our meeting.